In your screenplay, you don't want to have to think about formatting. Final Draft 12 automatically formats your screenplay. In your screenplay, you don't want to have to think about formatting. Final Draft 12 automatically formats your screenplay to industry standards, allowing you to focus on what you do best, writing. Final Draft, used on 95% of all productions, contains many features that make your writing process easier and more efficient. Writing your script is as quick and easy as hitting Tab and Enter. Don't bother reaching for that mouse. Use Smart Type to cut down on keystrokes by auto-filling commonly used names, locations, and more. Use the beatboard and outline editor.
Oh no, I was on mute. Of course. I saw like a million comments. Guys, are we still in Mercury and retrograde, or can I still use that excuse? It's been like a year and a half of virtual events. That's okay. Clay did that on our last ethical set series. So this will be the theme, just always being on mute, trying to get our voices heard. Welcome to our creative sustainability session on promoting Hollywood diversity with the pioneers of the inclusion writer. I'm Megan Ross, Seed&Spark's head of creator success. Before we begin, we'd first like to acknowledge the land we are all on is occupied territory. Please check the YouTube live comments feed for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from, or in the video description if you're watching this as a VOD. I am coming to you from the land originally belonging to Jamanos, Tonkawa, Coahuitecan, and Comanche, aka gentrified Austin. If you're not familiar with Seed&Spark, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools for wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding and education to impact distribution. And we have several wonderful event partners to thank today, and Danny will share their links and social handles in the chat. Women of Color Unite is a social action organization focusing on fair access, fair treatment, and fair pay for women of color in all aspects of the entertainment and media industries. The Black Film Allegiance is dedicated to uplifting and creating connectivity amongst Black filmmakers in the industry through a database featuring Black creatives, their diaspora table talk series, and more. And Mezcla Media Collective works to ensure that women and non-binary filmmakers of color realize their full potential as storytellers and agents of change, providing resources to more than 600 women of color based in Chicago. So I encourage you to check out and support the work each organization is doing to diversify the entertainment industry. And I'd also like to quickly thank our sponsor, Final Draft, the #1 selling screenwriting application in the world, used by over 95% of film and TV productions in North America. And we're also running a giveaway right now on our Instagram and Twitter accounts to gift copies of Final Draft 10 to 2 lucky attendees of today's session. To participate, follow Final Draft and Seed&Spark on either platform. Share your favorite takeaway from today's event in a tweet or in a comment on our dedicated Instagram post, and be sure to include the hashtag InclusionWritersCSS for consideration. The 2 winners will be announced and notified on Monday, July 12th, and Danny will share links to our social media giveaway posts in the chat for more info. All right, tech issues aside, muting myself aside, we got through all of that together. Now I'll finally introduce our amazing guests for today's event, and we'll bring them on one by one. So first off, Fanshen Cox is a creative development executive at Pearl Street Films. She is also the playwright, producer, performer of the one-woman show, One Drop of Love, exploring the construction of race in the US and how it affects our closest relationships. She is the co-author of The Inclusion Writer with Dr. Stacy Smith and Kalpana Kotagal, the co-host of the Sister Brunch podcast, and is dedicated to contributing to change in the entertainment industry so that everyone feels seen and heard. Please welcome Fanshen. Hey. Next up, we have Kalpana Kotagal, is a highly accomplished civil rights and employment litigation attorney at Cohen Milstein and the co-author of The Inclusion Writer. Kalpana represents women and other disenfranchised people in high-profile class action litigation as one of the top employment lawyers in the nation. She's a TEDx presenter, has had op-eds in the Washington Post, The Hill, and Variety, and was featured in the highly acclaimed documentary produced by Gina Davis called This Changes Everything, which addresses gender discrimination in Hollywood. Please welcome Kalpana. Next up, we have Dr. Tasmin Plater, who's the head of HR for Endeavor Content, where he played an instrumental part in Color of Change's #Change Hollywood initiative, led the creation of the content scorecard, and joined the original co-authors of The Inclusion Writer as the newest co-author. Alongside the team, he helped create the Inclusion Audit Committee, IAC. He's also on the advisory board of Entertainment Industry College Outreach Program, HBCU in LA, and co-heads the diversity working group across Endeavor, ensuring Hollywood continues the fight for more inclusion at all levels. Please welcome Dr. Tasmin Plater. And finally, we have Amity Paye, the interim director of storytelling and marketing and the senior director of communications at Color of Change. She oversees the organization's media strategy, social media, design, production, and partnerships to make Color of Change a household name and to drive important victories on tech, changing Hollywood, and criminal justice reform. Since joining the organization in early 2020, Amity has tripled Color of Change's press reach and has been instrumental in holding corporations to their pledges to support Black lives after the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. Please welcome Amity Paye. Thank you all for joining. So people might get angry at this, but I've never seen an Avengers movie, but to me, y'all are the Avengers of the entertainment industry in my mind. Let's scrap that whole franchise. You guys are the Avengers. So let's kick things off and start early days. So this is 2016. And so some people are familiar with Frances McDormand's Oscar speech in 2018. That was the first time I heard the word inclusion writer. And originally I thought she said inclusion writer, and I was like, I want that job. That sounds good. So Fanshen and Kalpana, can you explain to our audience exactly what an inclusion writer is and how did the idea behind it first come to fruition?
Definitely. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for putting these together. We're always looking for ways to kind of demystify what the inclusion writer is. So this is so helpful to be part of the CSS, but also give me a second because I want to win that final draft. Okay, I'm done with that. Make sure everybody gets your final draft in, get that giveaway.
Great plug.
Yeah. Come on now. And thank you to Women of Color Unite and the Black Film Allegiance and to Mescla. Thank you so much for your support of this. And of course, we support you too. And you're a big part of the inclusion writer. So in 2017, I started working at Pearl Street 2016. And then met Dr. Stacy Smith to find out what work they were doing at the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and what we might be able to do at Pearl Street, which is owned by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, to utilize their kind of power and privilege in the industry. And she said, I've got this idea. At the time, it was for gender parity, gender equity in the industry. But she said, what if A-listers added a clause to their contracts that stated that inclusion and representation was important to them? And Matt, Ben, and I thought it was a great idea and that was something they could add to their contracts. But of course, we wanted to expand that from not just for women, but for, racially marginalized folks, for people with disabilities. And so they said, yes. So Stacy and I said, let's get to work on a draft. But we really needed legal expertise to do it because it was going into contracts. And we were so fortunate to get connected to Kalpana Kotagal. We will say that Anita Hill was, considered to be one of the first people. And then we got Kalpana and I was like, wow, if we had only known what we were getting out
Yeah.
of
And y'all are coworkers at the same firm pretty much. That's amazing. Powerhouse.
Yeah. So it was incredible to end up having this woman that, we didn't have a big name at the time. She's a superstar now. So she might not even say hi to you on the street if you see her because she's that big. But we put that legal, between her legal expertise, between Stacy's understanding of lack of representation in the industry and doing the data analysis and collection, and my experience just kind of like dealing with Hollywood, we put together the early ideas and drafts for the inclusion writer. And so I'll pass it to Kalpana to speak more specifically about what it is and what it entails.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for that backdrop, Fanshen. I don't know about any of the narrative pieces about me, but yes, it was Anita who initially connected us, and I am forever grateful to her and am really lucky to continue to work alongside her. I think the way that I think about the inclusion writer in very concrete terms is that it is a tool, it is a contractual tool, so it's written like an addendum that in its initial conception, an A-lister, somebody with a lot of clout and negotiating power, could bring into their contract negotiations to add to the contract, right? And what it specifies is a process for doing hiring better, for building a more equitable workplace through hiring practices that actually deepen and diversify pools, set benchmarks and targets, really, so that you know where you are and where you're going, collect data, and then reflect back on how you're doing, right? Those are the sort of 4 pieces of the inclusion writer. And they've been there from the very beginning. We really recognized in creating the inclusion writer that this was an industry that had been resistant to change for a long, long time. And so what we were trying to figure out was what were, from our perspective and our reach, what were the levers of change that we had available to us? And it was A-listers with bargaining power. We, I think, are super lucky, and this latest chapter in our work with Color of Change and our work with Tasman really reflect this, how the very principles that we embedded into the original inclusion rider, into the contract, are really the foundation blocks for policy change, for structural change, for systemic change. And I think that's what the latest chapter of the inclusion rider really shows us, is how we can move from contractual mechanisms for change to systemic mechanisms from change. But what we started with in 2016, 2017, and what Frances McDormand talked about from the Oscar stage was a contract. And it still is that. And it's interesting. It's innovative. We're not aware of other dynamics or situations that have used contracts in that way. And I think in that way, it's a very insider strategy. It's a very Hollywood strategy. Everybody talks about contracts and everybody's got their lawyers and their managers and their agents. And this is a tool that they can bring to bear to fix processes for hiring.
And I'm just going to say, because this is so important, that kind of in those initial days when Frances McDormand talked about it, and we weren't ready for it, but we were thrilled. But a lot of people focused on those first 2 elements, which were, deepen and diversifying the hiring pool and then setting the benchmarks. And those are important, but a lot of people didn't start talking about or even remember to do the second half. So we're going to repeat a lot those 4 elements, because that's what makes it a successful inclusion writer. So even if you hear someone say, oh, they're using an inclusion writer or they're adding a writer to the contract, if it doesn't have those 4 elements, we learned in the last 4 years now, 5 years, that it has to have all 4. And it's great to have Taz and Amity here to talk about why those are so important. And of course, having Tasman utilize this in a systemic way was what really changed the game for us. And we're so grateful. And that was because Color of Change put us all together. So 4 elements, don't forget, and especially the last 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I was so grateful to see that. I think especially the accountability piece, because there's so many companies right now talking the talk and not really walking the walk, especially after last summer. And I'm like, okay, you guys said you were gonna, support Black creatives, but like, have you like greenlit a single project from a Black filmmaker? Like, let's look at your roster. So segueing into that, why do you believe it's important? And this is for everyone to answer, for the inclusion rider in its current form with the 4 parts to exist right now in the entertainment industry?
Yeah.
Well, go
Sorry.
ahead, Taz.
Go ahead, Amity. Go ahead.
Well, I feel like I'm going to lead into whatever I would expect you to say. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're at a moment in our country's history when, racial justice is a majoritarian issue. Social justice is a majoritarian issue. We saw more people protest in 2020 than in any other moment in American history. And so what that says to us is that there's a mandate for change. But to your point, it's like folks can talk a lot. And that makes people feel good, but actually like getting to that change is what we actually need and what folks are actually calling for in our country. And so that's why it's important, right? It's like, if everyone wants to see change, we have to both create and then also like publicize and use the tools to make that change. Like, it doesn't come out of nowhere, right? It's like, it takes leaders like the wonderful people I'm on with today. It takes leaders like developing tools that actually get us there. And this is one of them. And Taz, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just, at its foundation, I look at the jobs we do. We get an opportunity to do every single day. We're content creators. We are responsible for shaping the images of people and how folks think about LGBTQ, people of color. We are responsible for putting images on screen. And when you really look at the responsibility we have as content creators, that's when the inclusion rider really comes really to the top of the list, because it's like, look, we're responsible for making sure that when folks watch TV or those jobs behind those cameras, that it looks like the communities in which we are actually shooting. Where we're shooting in Georgia, then we should really be tapping into that community. Whether we're shooting in Canada, we should be tapping into those local communities. And that's the reason why I feel like this document is so important, because it allows you to take a step back, even in the very beginning of the development process, when you're thinking about where you're going to shoot, who's going to be at the table from the creative aspect. When we actually, have things on paper, who's going to actually be behind the camera, it allows you to take a step back. And 2 things I tell folks to make it super easy. The inclusion rider, we're just simply slowing down the hiring process, right? In the industry that hires so quickly. I came from the manufacturing industry where we would hire 2,000 folks in a couple months. I see the way I came onto the entertainment industry 5 years ago, and I had no idea the speed in which we ramp up a production with hundreds of people. And if we just take a step back, work with the folks that make the decisions at the studios and on the ground, the UPMs and the LPs, and we slow down the hiring process, and we're just now inserting a conversation and talking about how important this is for us as a studio or a production company, and it changes the dynamic. And that's what this inclusion has been proven to do so far.
Can I add, because Tasmin and I didn't do the best job of setting up kind of more of the background beyond when Frances McDormand spoke. But what Tasmin is offering as part of this inclusion rider is a packet of how to do this. So unlike when the inclusion rider first came on the scene, where we were like, here's a template, use the rider in your contracts, Tasmin, because he had been using it at Endeavor Content, actually at a company, now has an entire, the templates for surveys and how you ask in a legal way and in a way that makes the employees comfortable, how you ask for them to self-identify. And also just, he's got a full packet of language there of how to get this right for a company level versus just individuals like Matt, Ben, Michael B. Jordan, all those folks who said they're going to use it and they do. But here Tasman's actually putting into place place, and now giving you all the gift of just follow, literally follow his policy guide, and you will get this right. And that will lead to, as he said, better storytelling for everybody, and young people, little people seeing themselves. So when they get to our age, they don't have to keep doing this work.
Oh, Kalpana, you're on mute.
Of course I am. I'm like being a good doobie and muting myself, but then I start talking. I want to just respond to what I understand are in the comments about the 4 pillars and expanding a little bit on them a bit more. I think I breezed through them quickly, and they are dense and important. And so let me just take a step back really quickly on the four components of an inclusion rider. These are practices that come out of employment law and HR. Nothing that I'm saying here is revolutionary. I think what we've done here is to really put them together in a way that is usable. And obviously what Fanshen just said about Tasman's work is crucial there. So the 4 pillars, again, are as follows. 1, it's really important at the very outset of your process to deepen and diversify your hiring pools. You can't hire folks from underrepresented backgrounds if they're not part of your hiring process. And I think that that's really essential. And Amity is reminding me that these are on the Inclusion Rider website, which is inclusionrider.org, which I know is already in the link. So you guys already have it. Inclusionrider.org has all of the materials as well as all of the background. It has frequently asked questions, which Fanshen has put together, which really respond to a lot of the criticisms that we've heard and the excuses that we've heard over the last 5 years. It has all of Tasman's materials. It has resources, inclusionrider.org. Okay. So deepen and diversify your hiring pools. It's essential. You can't get to a diverse and equitable workplace without hiring pools that reflect the diversity that you want to see at the end game. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. And it can be done. And again, I'm going to point you to Tasman's resources and the other resources we've developed. We encourage you, at the outset of productions to create a plan for hiring, right? That is like the first part of the inclusion rider, and that starts with deepening and diversifying your hiring pools. The second thing we think is really important is to set benchmarks. What do I mean by benchmarks? Benchmarks are goals. They're targets. They are not rigid. They are not quotas. It is crucial to hire folks who are qualified for the job. If you don't find folks who are qualified for the job, then that reflects a systemic failure in the industry, and will take us back through the full cycle when we talk about accountability again at the end and the data collection piece of it. But set benchmarks. These are goals. These are goals for where you want to be on this production at the end of it. And if you're looking across an entire slate of productions like Tasman is doing at Endeavor Content, you can think about benchmarks for your entire slate that reflect change over time. In the next 5 years, I want to see Black representation behind the camera increase by 10%, right? That's a benchmark or a target. It's not rigid, but it's crucial.
And very quickly, always keeping in mind, these are qualified people, right? And that's why Kalpana's expertise is so important on setting the benchmarks, because none of us want to be tokens. We don't want you to just hire us just because we're Black or just because we're LGBTQ. We want you to hire us because we are qualified, and this is a target and a goal that you have. So that's super important. So now you've got 2 points. Deepen, diversify the hiring pools, set benchmarks.
The third one is to collect the data. How did you do? How did you do when you deepened and diversified your pools and you set those benchmarks? You can collect data for a single production. You can collect data across a slate of productions. You can collect data on an annual basis. You should be collecting data regularly because it allows you to measure your progress or lack of progress over time. So collect the data. We give you a lot of guidance for how to do it, for how to make sure it is intersectional and disaggregated, for how to respect the backgrounds of your folks when you gather that information. There's a lot of resources that we provided for how to collect that data properly. And we encourage you, we think it's really important to work with external experts on this. It could be Color of Change to do an audit. It could be an academic. There are plenty of folks, and Color of Change has great resources on folks who can do this work. It's really important to work with an external expert who can reflect with you on how you did. How does your data look? Did you collect it correctly? How can you correct it better? How can you collect it better? All of those things are really baked into the document. And what I'm saying is all there. So you just have to look at it, but I'm trying to break it down a little bit further. And then the final point is to hold yourself accountable. So as you look back on your process, on your hiring process, on your benchmark setting, on your data collection process, how'd you do? And if you didn't do well, if you came up short, then it's really important to make a meaningful commitment. We really think it's important to make a financial commitment to the organizations that are doing the work to improve pipeline failures, to deepen and diversify pools, to lift up folks from underrepresented backgrounds who are looking for work in the industry. So hold yourself accountable in a meaningful and ongoing way. And then don't stop, right? This isn't a one-off thing. You don't do it once and then you're done. You have to do it again and again. This is an iterative process. It's a circular process. And over time, maybe it's more like a wave-like process, because over time you move forward. Right. And that's the objective. But you can't do it in a one-off way. You got to do it slowly and carefully and thoughtfully. And that's what the processes we've laid out for in those 4 pillars are.
So if anybody ever says to you, we're using the inclusion rider, or we already use that in our contract, or we're not going to, or we already are doing it, ask them about those 4 elements, because that is our understanding, our research, our experience, that's what makes the change, right? It's not just the first 2. It's got to be the whole thing. And then it's cyclical. You're giving back, you're giving to the organizations. If you fell short, you're giving to the organizations that help create the pipeline so that you can deepen and diversify your hiring pool. So it's like a big, beautiful circle.
Yeah, it's definitely a circle. And like to reiterate this piece about accountability, like this is the thing that everyone is complaining about right now, is like we got lots of commitment without accountability. And so making sure that you have those four elements also means, and doing that at the beginning also, right? It's like if you're adopting an inclusion rider now and you're committing to that, to like gathering data and reviewing your actual progress. If you do that at the start, you can set an expectation across a company. And Taz, I think you are your work is the perfect example of this. So you set an example across a company that progress is going to be vetted. It's going to be reviewed. There's going to be follow-up, right? If you're talking about accountability from the start, then it sort of ends up being built into the whole process.
Yeah, that's a really great transition into Dr. Tasman, how you first learned about the original inclusion rider and you took it and ran with it to utilize at Endeavor content. Can you share about how you applied it?
Yeah, of course. So I heard about the inclusion rider. It was literally my second day at work. I was called and I had a meeting with my co-presidents, Chris Rice and Graham Taylor. They had been advocates of the inclusion rider since the onset. And they always thought about, they said, Tass, we've always thought about right now the leverage, as Fanshen and Kalpana stated earlier, is on the A-list. But what if studios actually adopted this as policy? And then as part of our policy, all of our shows will be under inclusion rider umbrella. And I was like, okay, well, great. I've never heard of inclusion rider. It's my first week at work. You all know how it is for the first 6 months. You're like showing out, doing it. So I did a quick study with the inclusion rider and took about 2 months and broke it down, every single element of the inclusion rider, and said, great, I think what will work is if I developed a policy from this. And that's what I did. So I developed a policy. I tried to implement the policy in Canada, in BC to be exact, and ran across a lot of resistance, not from the production perspective or a company perspective, but from a legal employment perspective, right? About collecting data, et cetera. And recording data and giving surveys, all of those hurdles. And that's when we actually took a step back and developed 2 processes that we follow now in Endeavor Content, which is eventually we took a pause, we tried to apply principles, we went back, then we started to work with Color of Change on a Change Hollywood roadmap, and we released this slate of tools. But all the tools were based on all the pitfalls that we ran across on trying to implement the inclusion rider, whether it was in the US, whether it was in Canada, whether it was in Paris. And one of the things that we were very successful of is doing, we applied the principles of the inclusion rider on our show when we were in Toronto. And what one of the elements is, okay, great, we're going to run across a pitfall when it comes to collecting data. But what we can do is, typically we partner with the city of Toronto and said, this is our efforts, to increase representation on our show. And we're able to use their diverse databases that were already vetted and had BIPOC individuals, and then rotate those individuals on our show. And as you see, that's the first element of the inclusion writers, using deep and diverse as part of using a deep and diverse in your talent pool, is leveraging the databases that you have at your disposal. So and that's the good part I love about the inclusion, right? It's a template, right? So there is no one size fits all. You can, as long as those 4 principles are met, you can, like for me, I had a slate of database I could use, but I tapped into the city of Toronto. That's not included in our in our resource guide. But now, since it's on Color of Change, we can easily update that information. And we created several ways to collect data and create self-accountability clauses. But so that was my venture. I ran across in 2018. I finally got the opportunity to meet Kalpana and Fanshen via Dr. Stacey Smith in 2020. And for the last 10 months, we've been on this journey, and we've been able to finesse this tool to what it is today.
And it can't be understated or overstated how important that connection was in working with Color of Change, who has such a great reputation and deserved reputation for systemic change. And we always wanted to utilize this for systemic change, but we were in a position where, we didn't feel like anybody was going to listen to any one of us 3 women. We had to ask, the men to do it. But then we always wanted eventually for this to be kind of system-wide, and Tasman actually utilizing it that way, and Color of Change bringing their long-term experience and success with it, made it so that the industry is using it. We have to mention AMC Studios, which has also agreed to adopt it throughout their company, as well as lots of, I think 13 other companies have signed on. If you're interested in signing on as a company, we will be meeting, I think quarterly, to talk together with the companies about how it's going, what are the pitfalls, how can we keep improving. So I believe if you go to inclusionwriter.org, you can also give us your contact info, and we'll add you to the group.
Yeah, Fanshen, that's an excellent point. I wanted to mention that because we got to a point at the studio where I was still trying to figure out where to include, how to really just push it out and roll out in a very succinct way, until we did finalize our relationship with Color of Change on the Change Hollywood roadmap. And the inclusion rider was part of the Change Hollywood roadmap, which focused on, increasing representation in the entertainment industry, and a plethora of other elements, and inclusion rider was a huge part of it. And that's what really dusted it off and really kind of re-emphasized the focus. And right now we're right in the middle of re-rolling out the inclusion rider at our studio in a very robust way. So I just wanted to make sure I had because I don't know if you have time to dig into the Change Hollywood roadmap, but if we dig in there, it was a huge reason on the reason the 3 of us got together on this.
We should do that.
Yeah, let's dig into it now. Because that was a big piece of it. I know. So it happened last summer. I remember when the video rolled out, or the announcement rolled out, and then this spring, the inclusion rider, essentially like 2.0, came out. So let's go back to last summer. Amity, can you discuss what Color of Change's #Change Hollywood initiative is, and how it's really expanded the mission of the inclusion rider?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Change Hollywood is a project that Color of Change launched right after the murder of George Floyd, really in response to all of those statements that we saw everyone making. We didn't want to just call people out. We wanted to call people in to work, right? To actually follow through on some of these things. And so Change Hollywood is a roadmap to racial justice change in the industry. It includes 4 key buckets of work that we are suggesting that anyone in the industry works towards. There are lots of different ways, depending on what you do, that you can work towards these 4 buckets. And at Color of Change, what we did is we launched an accountability program for companies that have signed on to these to the roadmap with these 4 buckets. And so to this point around accountability, it's like, okay, you said you want to, support Black people. You say Black Lives Matter. You say you want to create more inclusive workspaces for everyone. We're going to sit with you once a month now and actually check on that progress, see what the plans are, make sure plans are being implemented and actually developed. And also Color of Change, we're it's good to say that you're going to donate money, but also taking a look at your, own internal practices. It's harder to look at yourself than it is to, give money or PR to an issue. And so that's really the goal, is for all of us in Hollywood to look at ourselves, the work that we do, and the decisions that we make day to day, and challenge ourselves to make changes to those decisions, to really rewrite the rules, the written and unwritten rules of the industry, so that it is a more just and inclusive space. And so one of the pillars of the roadmap is invest in Black talent and careers. And that's where the Inclusion Rider update that we did with Fanshen and Kalpana and Taz really came in. It's like, so often, people say they don't know what to do. Sure, they want to invest in talent and careers, but where do you start? And so to start, we learned from the last few years of work on the Inclusion Rider, created an update together, talked to folks in the industry about the challenges they were having with inclusion riders, and put out a new one that includes all of that learning and all the resources, so it's a lot easier to actually use immediately. Not all of us have the time that Taz really put into it to build resources, right? So we're trying to start resource sharing in the industry, not only for an inclusion rider, but really for everything. We've got folks that are digging in to figure out how they can stop using police on sets, for example. We want to make sure that they're sharing their learning with everyone else, so we can all do that and keep Black people safe. Or same thing with each of the buckets of the roadmap, each of those pillars. And so that's the overview. And there's lots of resources still in development. We're in process with the inclusion riders for helping companies really streamline that the data collection that they're doing, so that the inclusion riders can be fully used across the board as policy. And so it's a lot of exciting work, and you got the best folks in the business on the line here about it.
Yeah. And it's amazing. I'm so grateful that y'all put it online, because now there's really no excuse for people to not apply it. They have the template right there. You have a little filter for individuals, for companies. Back in 2018, I heard the word inclusion rider and I had no idea what I was doing. And I said, I'm just going to hire all women and people of color for my crew and my main cast. But I didn't have the paperwork. I was like Michael Scott in that episode of The Office. I declare bankruptcy. I was like, I declare inclusion rider. But now I'm like, all right, now the next time I go to set, I will put this in my paperwork, and actually apply it and take all those 4 elements to see it through. So
yeah. And you have databases of people of color and people of diversity, right? That you can search through now. That some of these are resources we've developed that you can search through them and find those staff, rather than it just coming out of the people that you know and are close to already.
Yeah, that's a great plug. Our partners, Women of Color Unite, have the JTC list, which is really great. Array Crew launched this year. There's Black Film Allegiance has their own, pretty much there's just nonstop organizations. So no one can say, I didn't know any, XYZ creatives.
We have to shout out another one, which is Kruvi. The great thing about Kruvi is that while you are kind of putting your crew together, it gives you're already also doing the data analysis. So it creates a graph for you to see how you're doing around inclusion. It also lets you know, for example, elements you need to qualify for the Oscars, for example, also for the inclusion writer, so you can filter and make sure, and it's going to tell you right away how your hiring is doing. So another resource that we have are places that can help you with that data collection. And Kruvi is a great example because it can both help you find people and it's going to show you that data.
That's awesome. So, yeah, it's amazing. Like in the few years since that Oscar speech, there's just like it's you've handed over all the work, you've done all the work for everyone, and now it's just a matter of everyone now like putting their word into action. So this is for everyone. What are your long-term goals for the inclusion rider in its current edition and its impact on the entertainment industry?
Well, big picture, we had more than a dozen studios sign on to use the inclusion rider for all of their productions. Companies like AMC, as big as AMC, but also Pearl Street Films, right? It's like a real amazing range. And so those companies they signed on just a few months ago to use them. They're putting all of their systems in place to be able to do that across the board. And so we should see a whole lot of productions in the next few months using these inclusion rider policies as policy. And so it's really exciting. And we're in talks with lots of other studios and individuals to adopt the inclusion rider. So that's the biggest piece, is like, we got to, make sure that folks are using it and have the infrastructure to really make it, policy. And then, then we get into accountability, which is like Fanshen said, it's ongoing. It's a circle, right? So, we're gonna be getting data collection from all of these folks, being able to see what trends are in the industry. We're gonna start assessing like success and challenges that companies are having and individuals are having to using it. And then towards the end of the year, we'll probably see some companies making like those donations because they didn't reach their goals, right? And that's all part of the accountability process and is public as an accountability measure. And so we'll see lots of that in the next year, and then we'll just do it all again, just go in our circle over and over again.
My hope is that we'll start to see a demystification of the systems that need to be in place to really do this work, so that it, genuinely becomes systemic, and then it allows us to take the next step in terms of the narrative, right? That we are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, but also that this is a pathway to workplace equity at a much more structural and broad level. Good for you getting it right, on a particular production or across your slate of productions. But then what are you doing to make sure that those creatives are pushed into decision-making positions? What are you doing to make sure that you're greenlighting content that actually comes from creatives from underrepresented backgrounds? All of that deeper and ongoing work only happens if we get the representation piece of it right. And so that, to me, is driven by the data. It's driven by the accountability. And honestly, I think Color of Change's work here is really crucial. And I'm sorry about the background noise. I don't know why we have it. I feel like it's me, but I apologize for it. Okay.
It's not that bad.
That's what I got on what I hope to see next. I think the work is, look, this is an industry that has not changed in 40 years or 50 years or 60 years or since its outset, right? It's been exactly the same, and all kinds of strategies have been deployed to try and make it better. And I think one of the things that's different now is the role of organizations like Color of Change and really meaningful external accountability. That's really important. But my hope is that we actually start to see change, that what we see on screen and behind the camera really reflects the richness of the communities we all live in and come from.
I think for my overall hope, especially as an HR practitioner, is that, inclusion writers won't be needed in the next 5 to 10 years. It's like, we shouldn't have to write an inclusion writer. It should just be, like my president say this all the time, it's just the right thing to do, right? We should move from policy to practice, right? This will be muscle memory, just like we hire folks, and just the reason the industry got the way it is, it would be diverse because these inclusion writer practices would be built as a normal part of our DNA for our studios and production companies. Also, we get to a part and a segue in the industry where data sharing is a good thing. It's like, it's okay. It's okay where you are right now today. You know, we all have our areas of deficiencies, but one thing I love.
I think you've maybe cut out.
Oh, we just
Oh
got to
man, we'll find out what he loves in a bit. Fanshen, you want to share your hopes?
Yeah, my hope is a moratorium on cisgender heterosexual white male leads.
Over to you,
honestly. Oh, Tasmin, are you back?
Dr. Tasmin, you want to finish your thought? We hear you now.
Yeah.
I think, can you hear us? I think you're on mute. There you go.
I finished. Did
we
I cut out?
We gotta find out one thing you love. What was, finish that thought.
Did I cut out? Can you guys hear me?
Oh, I think I
we can hear you now. Taz,
okay.
You were starting to say something like, one thing I love, and then you went away.
Sorry, I went out. I said one thing I love about what we've built is that we have a coalition of studios and production companies that we've built with Color of Change that we can all learn from where we are in this journey. It's like, if I'm struggling with something now from a data collection piece or an accountability piece, I have 13 to 14 other production companies and studios that has heads of HR and BA individuals and studio executives that I can call and say, hey, how are you guys doing on this? Is there anything we can do? We can share information and get to the point to where we can do that across the industry and able for us to catapult our success with this, with equality across content for sure.
And I'll just complete that moratorium on cisgender heterosexual white men. And before folks get fragile, if you do this reflection that we're talking about, this important reflection for you to actually make this happen, you'll know that you have been part of perpetuating the issue. And you might have had the best of intentions like Matt and Ben do and continue to have, but there's no way that the industry would look like this if you hadn't also stepped up and done more. And so what if you step back from those lead roles or the director roles or the producer roles and you contribute to someone else having those roles? We're going to all get to see ourselves more. We won't have to have the inclusion writer anymore. But really the point of the accountability is not, wagging our fingers at you. It's you have helped to perpetuate where we are right now. Now you have this opportunity to help make it better, to help so that more people can tell their stories. So so I want to see folks continue to step up in the ways that they have. And lastly, I want to see that all of us are just human beings, and so we experience transgender disabled Black folks get married just like the rest of us. And so what if we just get to see a story about them getting married? What a rom-com just about, and we don't have to focus so much on their identity, although it'll be part of it, but also they just get to be the beautiful human beings that they are. That's when we really know we have reached this change that we're looking for.
Yeah, I would love that. It's like Friends gets to just be a show about people hanging out. Why can't that be everyone else? Like, why do people of color have to unload their trauma every time they want to create something? It's like, that can happen too, but it doesn't always have to be that story. But we'll jump right into questions from the audience. So Shrila C wanted to define diversity and inclusion and measure who is underrepresented. And I know you define that clearly in the template. So if anyone wants to jump on that question, and Shay will bring that on screen.
Yeah, let me just start with it. We think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and who constitutes an underrepresented individual in an expansive way. It is anchored fundamentally in the federal civil rights laws. So if you take a look at Title VII, for example, we talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about gender identity and sexual orientation. We talk about religious minorities, race and ethnicity, disability, So those are all encompassed in our definition, but we're very clear that you may be, it's a template, right? So you may be in a setting where really what you want to focus on is something different because it is anchored in the particulars of the place or the location of your production. So it should be tailored, but the definition that we include really focuses on people of color, women, members of underrepresented communities in sort of anchored in Title VII in those definitions. I also want to say that if you look at the language of the inclusion rider, it is explicitly intersectional, which is to say, we think it's really important to consider the ways in which those of us who experience diversity, who experience discrimination in the workplace along multiple different axes or vectors, that is amplified and it manifests in particular and challenging ways. And I think that's a really important component of this. We know that women of color in particular have been left behind in this industry. And I think it's, the work that Women of Color Unite do is so important for that reason. And so I think thinking about hiring on an intersectional basis, as well as all of these particular categories of people who have been historically underrepresented in the industry is really important. So hopefully that helps, Sheila, as you're thinking about who is underrepresented historically and currently.
Awesome. There was one question. Okay, so this is actually related to the music industry, and I had another interaction with inclusion writers in 2018 in Austin because they were trying to, a friend of mine who runs Full Gala Parts, who I think spoke to you.
We know her, absolutely, Sarah.
Yeah,
we met with her back in 2018. I think she was in DC at the time. I can't remember, Fanshen, you were there too, but it was the three of us met with her, right? It was great.
Yeah.
Yes, we know Sarah. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and so that's one of my friends. I introduced her. She moderated a panel on inclusion hiring in the music industry for a local organization puts on Babes Fest. So Nura Siegel asked, with a very disparate and dynamic energy, how can the music industry learn from and implement what you are doing in TV and film? Small world, by the way. When I emailed her asking her for a template, she sent me her inclusion writer template and was like, by the way, they're putting, here, it's all online now, which is really cool.
Amity, do you want to take this or do you want me to jump in?
Why don't you start and then I'll hop in after you.
So I'll just start by saying lots. What can the music industry learn? The music industry can learn lots. And you'll be happy to know that with Color of Change, Fanshen and I are partnering on work around the Change Music vertical of the Change Industries Initiative. And so stay tuned for that. But I think there's the sort of short answer is absolutely there is room for the music industry to take the inclusion rider and develop it. We think about music videos, which are not actually that different than film. And so the same principles really apply. But if this is an area that you're interested in, we hope you'll just sort of stay tuned to the work that's about to come out of the Change Music campaign that Color Change is leading. Amity, do you want to say more?
Yeah. I'll dig into this a little bit. So yeah, this is a good teaser. The same way that we have launched a roadmap to change in Hollywood, we created a roadmap to racial justice change in the music industry. And we're building coalitions of folks that are working on these issues together now. We're building accountability processes with studios and the touring companies and the agents. And so, yeah, we're going to put out an inclusion rider for the music industry, make sure that they are on the same path and we're all working together. Entertainment industries are so important to shaping culture in our country. Is like for a lot of people, the main way that they interact with people that are different from themselves are through entertainment. And so we have to make sure that the way that entertainment is developed, the stories that are told, whether it's music or fashion even, or in Hollywood, are honest and also diverse and represent diverse perspectives. And so, yeah, it's such impactful work that people can do that we need to really make sure that there's that level of accountability and process and thought put behind making sure that what we put out into the world is actually helping to build the world we want to see.
Yeah, and I'll quickly plug what my friend did is she reached out to the Austin Entertainment Commission. And like, she wanted to hold the whole city accountable. So you can make change on a local level. There are people with the budgets and, you know, the power to do that. And so what she's trying to do is make sure that the inclusion riders are now applied to like all Austin festivals, concerts, everything related to that.
So yeah,
awesome.
we've got in, you know, folks in fashion want an inclusion rider. We got a lot of work ahead of us. We got folks in fashion.
Yeah.
We've heard from a lot of district attorneys that they want inclusion riders. So it's, you know, it's really translatable everywhere.
And to your point also, you have, of course you have, you know, you've got executives here on this call, but anybody can ask for an inclusion rider. You really can. And even just mentioning it, you know, and as early as you can. So let's say you're a writer and you're developing a project. When you go to pitch that project, you can say up front, by the way, inclusion riders are really important to me. We're doing that at Pearl Street from the earliest, you know, parts of development, saying to the show creator or content creator, we're using the inclusion rider, we'd like you to use it. And it lets you know kind of what the person's, you know, commitment is. And so this is, everybody can ask for an inclusion rider. And now when they say, oh yeah, we're doing it, go to that website and say, are you doing these 4 elements? We can't say that enough, that it is really making sure that all 4 are there because that's what makes the difference.
And we have a question on the 3rd element. So Jaden asks, what is the most effective type of research methods that you have used in order to understand the severity of racial injustice?
I mean, I think there are different dimensions of this, and I know Amity will want to speak to this as well. There is the sort of straight look at representation, and that takes you part of the way there, right? So you can see whether folks are actually being hired behind the camera and on screen. And I think that's a piece of it. I think a piece of it is who are the characters? Like, what are the stories that are being told, right? And that's the narrative piece of it that's distinct, related to, but distinct from the representation piece of it. And then I think there are deeper questions that I alluded to about whether a workplace is genuinely equitable. So set aside the productions for a moment and look at the leadership. Who's in the C-suite? Who's getting promoted? How are they being paid? You know, if we think about this, I think about this as a civil rights and employment lawyer, and I think about the various different kind of dimensions of your workplace, of any workplace: pay, promotion, hiring, terminations, assignments, right? Those are all components of whether a workplace is meaningfully equitable. Retention, the sort of endurance over time. And then there's also the workplace culture issues, which are also, you know, huge and important and have their own metrics and methodologies for measurement. So lots of different ways to think about workplace equity. Representation is certainly a component of it, and I would argue it's a crucial component of it, necessary but not sufficient, as far as sort of how I talk about it. It's like you got to have that, but that's not enough. You got to go further to really examine equity in the workplace. And those are a complex set of questions with lots of complex methodological and research strategies for deploying and understanding them.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you again for all of your time, our wonderful panelists, Fanshen Cox, Kalpana Kotagal, Dr. Tasmin Plater, and Amity Paye, for your dedication to this crucial work that you're doing. We're so grateful. And thank you to our partners, Women of Color Unite, Black Film Allegiance, Mezcla Media Collective, and our sponsor, Final Draft, for their support. Thank you to our wonderful audience for watching and engaging at home for this discussion. So I know a lot of y'all have to hop off, so I'm going to plug events. Feel free to exit as you need to. So this event was part of our Ethical Set series, and you can catch the next one, Building a Diverse Set for Crew, on July 21st at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We're also teaching our entire crowdfunding and filmmaking curriculum weekly from July through September, free for all to attend virtually. And you can find these events and workshops at seedandspark.com/events. So I hope to see inclusion riders applied to all of our attendees' projects, thanks to the leadership and guidance of Fanshen, Kalpana, Dr. Tasmin Plater, and Amity. Thank you all and have a great weekend. Bye.